This is your reality check.
Welcome to The Reality Check, a Canadian show that explores a wide range of controversies and curiosities using science and critical thinking. I'm producer Pat, and with me is Cristina Roach.
Hey everyone.
We have two interesting segments for you today. Darren and Adam once again are talking with Dr. Roman Yampolskiy, this time about his recent work regarding the simulation hypothesis. But first, Cristina, you wanted to talk about standing in front of microwaves.
I did. There's a quirky YouTube channel I really like called Weird History. I recently saw a video about the history of the microwave oven, and it was more fascinating than I expected. I just know that channel is always going to make something, even if it sounds boring, really, really compelling. So I knew the melting chocolate genesis story, more on that shortly, but not much else about an appliance I use every day. Now, a long-standing debate is whether or not it's actually safe to stand in front of a microwave oven while it's in operation. So I thought that it would be fun to look into this because, as I've learned doing this podcast, the outcome of a deep dive can be enlightening. Microwave ovens have been a staple appliance in households around the world since the 70s, allowing for quick cooking of meals, defrosting frozen food, and reheating leftovers. I personally have never used a microwave oven to cook a meal, as I'm all about that Maillard reaction.
Right.
See episode 454 for the reasons why. While the convenience is undeniable, claims that exposure to microwaves emitted by the oven can be harmful to human health are ubiquitous. Let's see if there's any scientific evidence to back this up. First, a little history about its discovery. Percy Spencer, a brilliant engineer and inventor, accidentally invented the microwave while working on a radar-related project during World War II. As the Weird History video summarizes, Spencer worked for a company called Raytheon, which became a major U.S. military defense contractor in 1939 when World War II began. Now, they specialized in weapons, machinery development, and electronics like radar technology. He was what you may call a keener, racking up over 300 patents and becoming invaluable to the company. However, when the war was ending and the company was losing these valuable war contracts, they had to pivot to stay afloat, and they asked their top engineers what they should do. Since Spencer had made some wild discoveries working with magnetrons and electromagnetic waves, he suggested building an oven. I'm sure that didn't go over really great in that meeting.
With a defense contractor.
Right, exactly. Okay, so the story goes that one day in 1945, Spencer was standing in front of a radar magnetron, a type of vacuum tube that generates microwave radiation, when he noticed that the chocolate bar in his pocket had melted. He started experimenting with other food items and found that popcorn kernels popped and eggs exploded when exposed to the radiation. Now, the first microwave oven was nearly 6 feet or 1.8 meters tall and weighed over 700 pounds, 350 kilograms. It cost around $5,000, which would be about $68,000 today.
I guess if you think about early computers taking up a whole room. Yeah.
Totally, yeah. And that's putting it through the inflation calculator. Now, obviously, the size and price tag made it prohibitively expensive for us plebes, but Spencer's invention was initially used in commercial kitchens, with the first one debuting in a Boston restaurant in 1947. The first home microwave oven was introduced in 1967 and was much smaller and more affordable than the commercial models, obviously. By the 80s, microwave ovens were a common household appliance.
Right, that first one was called the radar range, wasn't it?
I don't know.
Oh, no, I think
that's
it was.
A good question.
A trivia question there for you.
Now, before I get into the crux of this segment, it's important to know how a microwave oven actually works. Now, microwaves are a form of electromagnetic radiation similar to radio waves, infrared radiation, and visible light. Now, these waves have a shorter wavelength than radio waves, but longer than infrared radiation, making them capable of penetrating materials such as food and water. When microwaves encounter these materials, they cause the molecules within them to vibrate rapidly, generating heat that cooks the food. Now, microwave ovens work by generating and directing these microwaves towards the food, allowing for fast and efficient cooking. The waves are contained within the oven by a metal mesh that prevents them from escaping. So when the oven door is closed, the waves cannot escape and are absorbed by the food, causing it to heat up. The concern about standing in front of a microwave oven while it's in use is related to the potential exposure to radiation. Now, some people worry that prolonged exposure to microwaves can cause harm to the body, leading to conditions such as cancer or reproductive problems. I should say prolonged exposure to microwave ovens. But the scientific evidence does not support these claims. The type of radiation used by microwave ovens is non-ionizing radiation. This means that it does not have enough energy to ionize atoms or molecules in the body, which is what causes damage to tissues and DNA. Non-ionizing radiation, therefore, poses little risk to human health. In contrast, X-rays are classified as ionizing radiation, a type that does have enough energy to remove electrons from atoms and can damage cells and DNA.
Thus the lead smoke when you get an X-ray. Yes.
Yeah. As you know, an ex of mine who was an X-ray tech had to wear this little thing that would count the exposure, and they would have to check these little devices, I don't know what they're called, on a regular basis because, he was exposed every day, obviously. The World Health Organization has stated that exposure to the low levels of microwave radiation emitted by household microwave ovens is not known to cause any health problems. The US FDA also regulates the safety of microwave ovens and requires that they meet strict safety standards. Here in Canada, Health Canada's webpage on microwave ovens states, quote, Health Canada has established a regulation that limits the amount of leakage allowed from any microwave oven sold, leased, or imported into Canada. This limit is well below the level of microwave exposure that would cause any known health effects. Right. However, there's still some potential risks associated with standing in front of a microwave oven. First, if the oven is old or damaged, it may leak radiation. This can happen if the metal mesh in the door is damaged, or if the seals around the door are worn or they're ripped. I think most people at this point have a pretty current microwave oven, but if you have an older one with these issues, it's recommended that you get it replaced immediately.
I suppose the risk, given that it's non-ionizing radiation, is that because it can cook food, people could get burned.
Yes, burns are a thing for sure, that they do mention as a health risk, although very rare. Right. Another concern people have about standing in front of a microwave oven is that they might be exposed to harmful electromagnetic fields, EMFs. EMFs are generated by the flow of electricity through wires and electronic devices. However, the amount of EMFs that are generated by a microwave oven, very low. And the level of exposure that a person would receive from standing in front of a microwave oven is well below the safety limits established by regulatory agencies. Despite these assurances, some people will point to studies that have linked microwave radiation to various health problems, including cancer and neurological disorders. Just know that most of these studies have been criticized for their methodology, and they have not been able to establish a clear cause and effect relationship between microwave radiation and any of these health problems. I linked to a great, concise Life Science article titled, Is it safe to stand in front of microwave ovens? And author Rachel Rettner says, although microwaves don't pose the same health risks as X-rays, that doesn't mean they aren't risk-free. Here's an excerpt from the article. Microwaves heat food by causing water molecules to vibrate, which produces heat. In theory, microwaves can heat body tissues in the same way they heat food, and at high levels, microwaves can cause burns and cataracts, according to the FDA. To your point earlier, Pat. But these types of injuries are very rare, and they've generally occurred when people are exposed to large amounts of radiation leaking through openings in the oven, such as gaps in the seal. What's more, the FDA requires microwaves to be designed in a certain way to prevent these types of radiation leaks. For example, the FDA requires that microwave ovens have 2 interlock systems that halt the production of microwaves the moment the doors open. And the agency requires that these ovens have a monitoring system that stops the device from operating if one of the interlock systems fail. So there's really little cause for concern that microwaves will leak out from your oven unless there's actually damage to the latch or the seal. It seems the biggest risk your microwave oven poses is the potential for burns or injuries from the hot food or containers you remove from the microwave oven. The FDA also warns of the potential risk of heating water in a cup and it becoming superheated. I've had an experience where I've heated water in a cup in the microwave and was pretty blown away by how hot it was. And it doesn't boil, right? You don't see the bubbles.
Right.
So yeah, that can be very dangerous. Another Life Science article I linked to titled "Can Water Explode in a Microwave?" gets into the nitty-gritty. In short, this urban legend is true. As the article states, if you heat a glass of water above its boiling point in a microwave and it does not boil, then you've created a potential ticking time bomb. When you move the glass or drop something into it, the water can boil vigorously and in some cases shoot out of the glass in a dangerous jet.
Wow.
Now, this is the first time I've really ever heard about this superheating thing and, water shooting out of a glass potentially. I only reheat my coffee in the microwave, and I've learned water mixtures are less likely to superheat than pure water, so not a concern for me, but very good to know. Mm-hmm. In conclusion, you shouldn't worry about standing in front of your microwave oven while it's in use. The scientific evidence overwhelmingly supports its safety and effectiveness. The amount of radiation and electromagnetic fields that are emitted by a microwave oven, very low. And the risk of exposure to these emissions is well below the safety limits established by regulatory agencies.
Wow. Well, thanks for that, Cristina. We'll now turn things over to Adam, Darren, and Roman. Hope everyone out there is staying safe and healthy, and we will talk to you soon.
Stay classy, not smartassy.
Hi everyone, we're back once again with Dr. Roman Yampolskiy. He's kindly joined us to talk to us, not about advanced artificial intelligence as a risk specifically, but some of his more recent work involving the simulation hypothesis. So you had a recent paper which got a lot of attention. I was wondering if you could just take us through an overview of what you were saying and why people might have found it so interesting.
Yeah, it's a paper about the simulation hypothesis, the idea that this world may be a computer program, like a video game. And if that was true, I'm not looking for evidence, I'm not looking for anything deeper. I'm just saying, if this is true, if we are in a software simulation, as a computer scientist, I want to know, can I hack it? So that was the question I asked, and I tried to understand what has been done in that domain, what can be done.
I think that's, a reasonable approach to the if-then, right? So we could have the discussion about whether we're in a simulation or not. I think we talked about the simulation on like 400 episodes ago.
It was over 10 years ago. It was, yes, December.
Yes, and so maybe we still are, and now the simulation is 10 years older. Mm-hmm. But it sometimes is very reasonable to say, well, if-then. And so, as you said, you might want to hack it. And how did you propose we might be able to do that?
Well, I'm still here, so let's just say nothing worked so far.
Or did it, right? How do you assess it where the simulation isn't just accommodating you? Isn't that kind of an argument could be used all the time?
They patched it, so we don't know.
Yes. I saw a black cat and now I don't anymore,
So it's a first paper in a whole new domain, so I wasn't expecting to solve that problem either. But I look at what we can do to kind of start testing the physics of simulation a little bit. Some people said that if we do things which are computationally intense, that may create some glitches and bugs. I look at how people successfully hacked virtual worlds and video games from inside, how they were able to get access to the root, essentially to the operating system from there, manipulate memory. What would that look like? There are some interesting parallels to kind of magic and magic spells. If you look at how Super Mario Brothers were hacked using Mario manipulations, they look almost identical to some of the like magic spells. And obviously, magic spells don't work. But interestingly, those Mario manipulations also don't work if you're off by a single pixel.
I'm not sure exactly what you mean by the Mario manipulations. Do you mean like within the game, the characters are to do like magic?
Right. So if you, and I'm making up specific moves, but like pick up a turtle, go left 2 steps, turn around, go right 1 step. Now you just return to a memory location specific bytes. Mm-hmm. And that allows you to, after a long while, to write out a whole program to the operating system, giving you superpowers within the game.
All right, so you're using movements within the game itself to then re-edit or edit the code of the game to then enhance your powers.
Yes, and I'm skipping a lot of steps to get there, but yes.
And maybe, it's probably useful just quickly for our listeners. The simulation is that the idea, as you said, we're kind of in a video game, and the idea is that there is something called base reality somewhere, which is like the real world, the foundation ground. And within that world, they are simulating various entities on whatever unknown systems to some extent. And we are, to some extent, some of those simulations that are running. And the idea is, to what extent, if you're in a simulation, can you figure out more or understand the simulation that you're in and or some aspects of base reality? I've always found this very intriguing, certainly as an idea to play with. And I encourage people take an approach like you've done, because why not? Explore the ideas, right? And maybe they don't go anywhere, maybe they do. But it seems that base reality is it's almost unknowable. Who's to say the physics are even the same? And I wondered how you think about that.
It is not obvious at all. It could be completely different physics. The hope is that whatever we are, our consciousness is physics independent and can be in some way transferred. And of course, it's not just about escaping into the real universe. There are different levels of hacks. You can get some additional resources in this simulation. You can get additional information. You can maybe extend certain resources. So all of it would qualify as long as it's not something which is just obvious byproduct of scientific manipulation of the matter.
I guess it's coming back to it, it's harder for me to understand what actually counts as a movement in that direction. So at one point, humanity didn't understand much about the laws of physics, and then we did. And we really think we've discovered them. They were always there. And there's even debates now on, quantum foam and is many worlds, interpretation of quantum mechanics correct, where there's a many worlds or there's some sort of observer effect, and what would really count as any progress in understanding what a simulation is versus just being kind of stuck, much like a person in a game.
It's an excellent question. So if we could take those spooky properties of quantum physics and scale them to large macro objects like humans, I think a lot of it would count. If we could do observer effects at that scale, if we could do entanglement at that scale, and there seems to be some reason to think we might be able to. So in the paper, I propose this type of experiments in quantum physics as exactly the type of direction for investigation we would need to take to figure out what can be done.
I want to sort of loop in our listeners to some extent without it being too complicated. Do you want to talk about Young's double slit experiment, or should I give them an overview?
Please do.
Okay, so the idea is that this is going to be a rough, off the top of my head memory of things. And we learned in the past, don't talk about quantum physics unless you're an expert. But the gist is, imagine you fire a laser through a little slit, and it's a very, very thin slit. You could imagine if you're firing this laser through this slit, kind of like a rectangle, you would see on the other side of the slit a rectangle on the wall or the screen, okay? Then, if you manage to fire a laser through two slits, what you'll get under certain conditions is, two slits like you would normally expect. It's sort of like, I shined a light through it and it's two holes, so I'm going to get two holes right on the opposite side. But if you make it so you're less aware of how the photons of light are traveling through these slits, what you get is like a diffraction pattern where you almost imagine two waves interacting with each other, and they're having crests and troughs where they're getting larger and smaller. So you'll have pockets of brightness and darkness spreading out in a horizontal manner. I saw this in my first year of physics, and it was really interesting to see, like in person, so to speak, where you're like, okay, there's a mark in the center, and then a certain distance, there's two marks on either side, and then even a further distance, two marks, and so on. And so this is usually, a quantum effect. It's called Young's double slit experiment, or some better variation you could find on the internet than the one I just gave you. But the gist is, quantum stuff doesn't usually scale to, as you said, the macro level. Now, macro could just mean, size of molecules, or it could mean, person level. It doesn't always, but sometimes people use it that way. So clearly, I don't think you mean humans sort of becoming diffraction patterns, because that doesn't make too much sense. So what do you mean when, say, talking about macro level?
So here we're just talking about observer effects. If I'm not looking at it, it behaves differently.
Mm-hmm. And if it's a simulation, do you mean like it may not exist and it is, so to speak, rendered when you look that way? Or
right, and that's exactly the type of evidence some people argue we would get for us being in a video game. So let's say we are. The real world also has limited resources, so they don't want to render things no one's looking at. So if no one's looking at the moon is not rendered. It's not there.
You're looking for shortcuts that the simulation's taking, but when that shortcut always kind of fill itself out once you do look, isn't there a bit of a problem there? Yeah.
Right. And there is other properties of quantum systems which kind of remind people of what it would be like if it was a virtual software simulation. So speed of light is there because it's the speed of a processor. It cannot update any faster, things like that.
Right. So I guess I want to say there's a logical, consistent way of looking at this, and it's useful to think about. But in another way, it's almost like, this is a bit uncharitable, embracing like conspiratorial mentality, right? Where like you just look at everything and you fit it under a certain worldview. The speed of light is this because of that. This is because of that. This is because of that. And it may be the case, but it's really hard to know if it is.
Right. But in physics, you look for a good explanation. So there is dozens and dozens of explanations for why quantum physics is observed, is measured the way it is. Mm-hmm. And the way we decide on what is the most likely correct theory is which one fits the data best, which one predicts results of future experiments the best, the simplest one. So you can still evaluate something like that as a scientific theory. It's not a pure conspiracy explanation.
Right. I was then thinking in another world, perhaps, closer we get to AGI, instead of us being shut down, we've actually won the game. And then you get some sort of prize that would make you as a human happy.
Or they just shut down the simulation because it's too dangerous because there's an AGI in it that could hack the simulation and get out or something.
Well, that is a good point where these things converge. Is there some people have concerns that we can only be simulated so much more in our own technological development because the computational load, so to speak, would be too high. And it certainly seems like if there is an AGI that could threaten the situation under the assumptions of some people have. What do you think about that?
We might crash it, but then Bitcoin can crash it. We don't know what the amount of compute given to us. My interest was ultimately connected to what I work on, AI safety. And there is multiple connections. One is, in AI safety, one of the earliest proposals was to put AI into a safe environment, a virtual world, so it doesn't cause any problems, doesn't access real resources. Sometimes it's called AI boxing, containment. And pretty much everyone agrees that it will escape. It will find a way, whether through social engineering attack or through discovering some physics loophole, it will manage to escape from that virtual environment. And in a paper, I basically say that it's a related problem to humanity being in a simulation. And if it is, then that AI is just in multiple levels of boxing, and we can see what it does to escape and either copy it or use its knowledge to kind of repeat that process and come along for a ride, escape from our box.
So are you suggesting that our simulated reality is a box for an AI, or you're just making that parallel?
Well, I'm saying if this is a simulation and we are a general intelligence, that could be our box where we are monitored for behavioral compliance.
So we are the AI itself.
We are the equivalent. We are reversed. And of course, if it's impossible to escape from the simulation, then we can learn how to properly box a superintelligence, which is also useful for AI safety.
And I guess they could nest the boxes too. I think I bust out and I'm just in another simulation.
You never know if you're at the bottom layer. Yeah, it could always be simulations all the way down.
Okay.
That's a very interesting way of looking at it, that, we are a loosely formed AGI on our way to trying to become smarter and maybe break out of our own box. That's a delightful idea to ponder. Just to go back to that, when you said, it always gets out and people thought it might work and then they didn't, I just wanted to highlight for people, the main reason, from what I understand, and please correct me, is that because we'll want our AI systems to do things that provide value to us, we're going to compromise on the safety aspect. Like, there is a way to have the AI in a box. It just doesn't do enough. So it's almost like no point really in building it.
It's part of it. So any type of communication with it, any type of observation where it passes information to us, opens a communication channel which it would be able to exploit. I don't know, and I don't think anyone knows, if not communicating with it, it would still figure out a way to escape. Maybe through some sort of physics loophole, but that's not well established.
And just to really sort of flesh that out, is the idea is if you asked it questions, some of those questions might be really benign. It gives an answer. You can kind of go test it and verify it without any risks. But for other things which you really might be interested in, it might give you an answer which somehow misleads you or leads to some other risk.
All right. Non-trivial questions where it really does something you don't already know an answer to, potentially dangerous. So like, tell us how to cure cancer. Oh, here's the recipe.
Right.
So the value is correlating with risk, really.
I would say amount of information being passed and its complexity, how easy it is for us to interpret it.
I know you said was an if-then. Do you put any credence that we're in a simulation? Do you think about this?
I'm almost certain. And in fact, if we are not, once we have the technology, I'll make sure I'll create enough simulations of this moment to make sure that we are.
Who doesn't want infinite listens to this particular podcast episode for both of us? Almost certain. So does that, I don't know, then how do you, thinking about the risk of advanced AI, does it change how you feel about it, or everything else is still just as real and concerning?
I'm still enjoying my simulated existence. I still don't want suffering. I still want longer existence. I'm curious about the real universe, but it doesn't change fundamentals.
Right. And this would be the perspective that, well, simulated suffering, if it's sufficiently simulated, is still suffering, correct?
It's pretty well simulated.
Would you say that your belief that we currently live in a simulation informs the plausibility and sort of the desirability of this idea of creating individual simulations for people that we can dive into and live a fulfilling life, because that's just a different simulation?
I kind of suspect that they encountered the same solution and we're in one of those. So I am, or many of us are. And so I'm just kind of trying to see if we can learn from that.
And you don't know if you're the character who spawned it or not.
I mean, I know I suffer greatly, so I'm probably not an NPC.
Sure.
That's what all NPCs say.
So maybe the non-players are, if they're not zombies, basically philosophical zombies, then functionally it's equivalent to being a person in any other sense, right?
So that brings in so many complexities. You can literally do a paper on every subtopic here. It's just a gold mine. It helps to simplify, not to go into nuanced. But I find it interesting that almost all of those ideas can be connected into one consistent explanation.
Yeah. Especially, I mean, it's one thing to, debate the many worlds interpretation. The other thing is to create many worlds and say, well, look, at least it's true for these simulated entities.
It helps to understand why it would make sense, why it would be inefficient. So it's actually easier to create every universe than to create one specific one.
Well, that's an interesting statement. Do you want to unpack that a bit?
Schmidhaber has a paper about it. And basically, if you start just outputting consistent simulations in numerical order, first simulation, second one, that algorithm, I just told you the whole algorithm. I don't need to know much else. I just print them all out at some point. Whereas if I need like this specific one with Earth, with Sun, with humans, that's a lot of data I need to program in.
One of them seems the difficulty of the specificity, while the other one does seem more computationally intense.
We don't know how much time they got. Time is relative.
Well, yes. And this is where you get to like, well, in our known physics, which may not be, yes, that sort of thing.
Yeah, people often make this mistake. They make assumptions about what is and what is not computationally expensive in the real universe.
Yeah.
You have no idea. You know about local limits, but it could be a very different game.
Thank you so much for spending this time with us. And I guess we'll find out maybe if we're in a simulation or not in the coming decades. Either way, thanks for joining us once again, Dr. Roman Yampolskiy.
Thanks for inviting me. If I escape, you will not see me for a follow-up.
Just put a note on your website. If people do want to follow up with you and learn more about your work, is there anything or anywhere we should direct them?
Yeah, you can follow me on social media, Facebook, Twitter. You can email me if you have any interesting ideas for collaborating.
Okay. Thank you once again.
Thank you.
For show notes or to discuss this episode, visit our Facebook page and website at trcpodcast.com. For general inquiries or to send a topic or parody suggestion, email info@trcpodcast.com. Help support the show by leaving a review on iTunes and liking us on Facebook. Follow us on Twitter @TRC_podcast.